Good afternoon and a good day to you. A happy Saturday to you, and welcome to another session of Ask the Pastor Bible Study Live. This one is going to be a short one, and I know that because I am in the midst of enjoying soccer World Cup, real football. And so, in about 45 minutes, there's going to be a very exciting game between Argentina and Mexico, and I definitely want to watch that. And so, because of that, I want to make a quick discussion here concerning Revelation chapter number 10, to answer a few questions there and to highlight something that I think is very important to understand concerning the issues surrounding the coming of the Lord in the book of Revelation. So, in Revelation chapter 10, which I'm going to put up in on the screen in a moment here, in Revelation chapter number 10, we find that six trumpets have already been blown. So, seven seals have already been broken in chapter number 6, going into chapter number 7, and then starting in chapter number 8, we are presented with the trumpets. And then the trumpets begin to be blown. And at the end of chapter 9, the sixth trumpet has already been blown. And so, in between the sixth trumpet and the seventh trumpet, which is the last trumpet, we see something very interesting happening. And that's what I want to discuss today. If you look on your screen here in Revelation chapter 10, so I'm going to just read Revelation chapter 10 and then discuss the issues that go with Revelation chapter 10. Let me just share this to a couple of my groups here. That should just about do it. There we go. So, Revelation chapter number 10, let's read together, and then we shall have hopefully a short but comprehensive and revelatory discussion of Revelation 10. So it says, Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head. And his face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. Now, since I'm not going to go back to this verse here, let me just put it here that in my view, this is another presentation of Jesus Christ as a mighty angel. We know that Jesus is the angel of the Lord. And we know that in this one, he is a special angel because he has all the divine characteristics of God that we see in other parts of the Bible, that we see in Revelation chapter 4. Look at him. He not only is mighty, he is wrapped in a cloud. He is coming in a cloud. He has a rainbow over his head, just like Yahweh has a rainbow over his head in Ezekiel and in Revelation 4. And his legs are like pillars of fire, and his face is like the sun. So this is none other than Jesus Christ. It is a metaphorical representation of Jesus. Verse number 2. He had a little scroll open in his hand. He had a little scroll open in his hand. If you remember in Revelation chapter 5, the Father sitting on the throne has a scroll in his right hand, but that scroll is rolled up and it has 7 seals. Okay. However, this little scroll is in the hand of this angel and it is open. So he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. If you've been following the teachings here and in many other preterist forums, you know that the sea represents the Gentile nations, the Roman Empire, and the land represents the land of Israel, the actual land of Israel, the people rather. So the sea is the people of the Gentiles, the land is the people of the Israelites. So it's not the physical land itself, but rather the people. And he called out with a loud voice, like a lion roaring. So here is another clue of who this could be. So he calls out, his voice is like that of a lion, the lion of the tribe of Judah. When he called out, the seven thunders sounded. The seven thunders sounded. And when the seven thunders had sounded, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the seven thunders have said, and do not write it down. Seal up what the seven thunders have said. So the seven thunders said something significant, something that John considered important enough to write down for the information that was being passed on to the saints that were going through the tribulation. Remember, John in chapter 1 says, I am your fellow brother in the tribulation. The tribulation was already ongoing. And John was writing the book of Revelation to encourage the brethren that the Lord was just about to come. So, but when the seven thunders sound, he's told, do not write it down. Seal that up. We shall come to that in a moment. And the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay. No more delay. But that in the days of the trumpet call to be sounded by the seventh angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as he announced to his servants, the prophets. So the mystery is what had been announced to the Old Testament prophets, and now John is saying that is going to be fulfilled when the seventh trumpet sounds. So that's when the mystery of the old covenant being transitioned into the new covenant, that's when it was going to finally be fulfilled. Then the voice that I'd heard from heaven spoke to me saying, go take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll, and he said to me, take and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey. And I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And I was told, you must again prophesy about many peoples and nations and languages and kings. So that is the end of the reading of the passage for this afternoon. Now, I'm not going to be trying to handle the whole passage. I want to focus, as the title says, on these seven thunders. I want to focus on these seven thunders. Now, background. In the book of Revelation, we have a series of sevens that are taking place, and there are many of them. But we have three main sevens. Three main sevens. So I'm not saying that the other ones are not important, but the three main ones are the seven seals, the seven trumpets, and the seven bowls of wrath. Now, there are other sevens. For instance, there are the seven angels to the seven churches. There are the seven stars, and so on and so forth. So there are many sevens in the book of Revelation. Seven in the book of Revelation is a representation of fullness or completion, wholeness. So once something is totally full or complete, it is presented in sevens. Amen. Now, but since we do have the book of Revelation really being a book of judgment, the letters to the seven churches were announcing the judgment that was about to come into the world at that time. And the seven churches were supposed to prepare themselves, and they were supposed to spread this message to all believers to say, the time has come. The great and awesome day of the Lord has finally arrived. And the prostitute, the mystery Babylon, the Old Testament apostate Israel was finally going to be punished. And the old covenant was finally going to be brought to an end. This is what the book of Revelation was about. And so we have the seven seals that once they are broken, then the final judgments of the old covenant begin. And these seven seals are followed by seven trumpets. And these seven trumpets are followed by seven bowls of wrath. And these three sets of judgments are what bring old covenant Israel to an end. And we know this, especially from a preterist perspective, that this took place in 70 AD. The seven seals, the seven trumpets, and the seven bowls of wrath were all fulfilled by 70 AD. So that when you read Revelation, and I know I'm kind of giving a very general overview. I said I'm giving a background so that when we start to discuss these seven thunders, you will kind of be up to speed. By the time you get to Revelation 19, the seventh bowl has already been poured out. And Revelation 19 takes place when, or rather, it records the time, Revelation 18 to 19 records the time that Jerusalem is destroyed and the temple in Jerusalem is completely destroyed. That is the final bowl of wrath. That is 70 AD. August of 70 AD, when the Great Tribulation ended and when the Lord had returned to redeem the saints of God. However, here in the middle of the sixth trumpet and the seventh trumpet, in the middle of the sixth trumpet and the seventh trumpet, what we hear is this, that there is this angel that comes. He is a mighty angel. He is wrapped in a cloud. There's a rainbow over his head. His face is like the sun. A case can be made that this is a representation of Jesus Christ. His legs are like pillars of fire, and he has a little scroll in his hand. So the little scroll is really the main focus of chapter 10. This is what John is going to be given to prophesy, to present to the saints. However, when he is standing there, this angel, his right foot in the sea, his left foot on the land, he calls out with a loud voice. He roars like a lion. When he calls out, when his voice goes out of his mouth, this voice forms seven thunders. Now, I want you to think about what thunders represent even in natural life. Thunders are frightening. Thunders are scary. Thunders are a cause, even on a regular basis, of shaking. So I want to put it to you that just like the seven seals, just like the seven trumpets, just like the seven bowls of wrath, the seven thunders are a declaration of judgment. The seven thunders are a declaration of judgment. We see many times in the Old Testament where we had that God, when he came to Paran, he came with thunder. So thunder is always presented as one of the devastating actions of God in judgment, in wrath. So here what we see and what I'm presenting is that the seven thunders represent an action of the wrath of God. But now what is interesting here is that even though the whole book of Revelation is about how the wrath of God is going to be brought down and into the old covenant system, the seven thunders sound, verse 4, John hears what they say. Whether they are revealing when that final act of judgment is going to take place or how, John is about to write that down. Because remember, every time that the seals are broken, he is told what that means. He hears a voice. He writes it down. When the trumpets are blown, he is given an understanding of what those trumpets mean. But when he goes to write down what the seven thunders have said, he hears a voice from heaven that tells him, seal up what the seven thunders have said. Do not write it down. Seal up what the seven thunders have said. Do not write it down. Okay. Now, why is this important? You see, in the Bible, with both Daniel and John, we have certain times that God gives a prophecy, God gives a revelation, but then he tells the prophet to seal up what has just been said. And the meaning of sealing up a prophecy is that the immediate audience will not understand the meaning of it, or are not allowed to understand the meaning of it. So it's not that it's not important, but rather it is an activity that indicates whatever is being said right now is being relegated to another time in the future beyond the people to whom it is being prophesied to. Let me show you an example. So go with me to the book of Daniel. And by the way, greetings to you, Martina. It's good to see you. Kare Ngash, good to see you also. Rosemary Endicott, and all of you that are here. Megs of Akama in North Carolina, welcome all. So let me take you over here to Daniel 12. Again, remember, I have to move rather fast. So if you have questions, I will answer them in another session. I will not answer questions in this session. This session is just going to be a teaching session because the Seven Thunders have not sealed up the Mexico-Argentina game that is coming up in about 30 minutes. So I'll be going to watch that. So anyway, Daniel chapter 12. The time of the end. The time of the end. Not the end of time, but the time of the end. We see here that Daniel is given the sequence of things that were going to take place that would culminate in the end of the old covenant and the establishment of the new covenant. Let's read. At that time, at the time of the end of the old covenant, that is, not the time of the end of time, not the time of the end of the universe, but the time of the end of the old covenant. At that time shall Michael, the great prince who has charge over your people, shall he arise, and there shall be a time of trouble such as has never been since there was a nation until that time. So this is the great tribulation that precedes the coming of the Son of Man. So immediately you should notice that whatever we are studying in Revelation is directly parallel to what Daniel is speaking about. Revelation is speaking about the soon coming of the Lord. Daniel is speaking about the soon coming of the Lord too, which is preceded by the great tribulation. But at that time, your people, the Israelites, let me block a user here that is trying to put porn into my broadcast. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust shall awake, resurrection, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. So do you see what Daniel is told to do here? The same thing that John is told to do in Revelation 10. Shut up the words. Seal this prophecy until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro. Knowledge shall increase. Now, if you go over here to verse number 8, Daniel, again, after being told about how all these things would end, says, I heard, but I did not understand. Then I said, Oh Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things? He said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. Okay, so Daniel is living about 600 BC, give or take, about 600 BC. 600 years before Christ. And the book of Daniel and the prophecies of Daniel are shut up and sealed so that no one could actually understand them and make sense of them. In fact, the Old Testament Jews had a great controversy whether to include Daniel in the canon of scripture. And even when they finally agreed to put in the canon of scripture, because they couldn't understand it, they put a ban, they put a curse against anyone who would try to figure it out and count the dates of when the Messiah would appear. So this is why, by the way, why many of the Jews, when Jesus was born, they did not know that it was time. Some of them had an idea that it was time, but they had not been paying attention to the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel is the one that gives you the exact times that the Messiah was to appear in the world, the 70 weeks prophecy. But it was sealed. But what we see is that in Matthew 24, Jesus unsealed the book of Daniel. Jesus unsealed the book of Daniel in Matthew 24. Look at this. Look at what Jesus does. When Jesus is discussing the Great Tribulation, remember that we just read about the Great Tribulation and the resurrection that was to follow in Daniel 12, right? Now look at what Jesus does. Jesus is going to discuss the things that were going to happen at the end of the age, the things that were going to precede and include the coming of the Son of Man. But look at what he does in verse number 15. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, so Jesus goes back to Daniel and says, now what Daniel was speaking about, this is what I'm talking about. And of course, at the end of Matthew 24, Jesus says all these things were going to take place in that generation, the first century generation. So Jesus unseals the book of Daniel. So we now know that whatever was prophesied by Daniel was going to take place in conjunction with the destruction of the temple, as Jesus describes it in Matthew 24. But now, let me take you to the end of Revelation. We are talking about sealing and unsealing of prophecies. So Revelation 22. Remember, our focus is Revelation 10. So all these other things that I'm saying here are simply support materials, so that when you're thinking to understand what is happening in Revelation 10, I want you to have this in mind. Daniel is told to seal up the words. Jesus unseals them. Then John is given a whole revelation of the things that were going to happen soon, that were going to culminate in the coming of the Son of Man, in judgment and in glorification. Two sides of the coin. Judgment for the apostates, glorification for the saints who had been waiting upon him. So what we see here is in Revelation 22, starting from verse number 10. So John has been given the whole prophecy, and then now he's told, and he said to me, the angel said to Daniel, do not seal up the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. Let the evildoer still do evil, and let the filthy still be evil, and the righteous still do right, and the holy still be holy. So at the end of Revelation, John is told, don't seal whatever is going to happen here. What is the meaning? Daniel is told to seal up his prophecy because it was not yet time for the prophecy to be fulfilled. John is told, do not seal it up because the time is near. Now, from the time of Daniel to the time Jesus unseals the prophecy of Daniel, it took 600 years. It took 600 years from Daniel to Jesus. So the book remained sealed for 600 years. Jesus unseals it. John, who is a disciple of Jesus, one of the 12, writes a revelation concerning the coming of the Son of Man, concerning the judgment that was going to come, the beasts and all these things that are in the book of Revelation. At the end of Revelation 22, he's told, this prophecy, don't seal it up. Don't seal it up. Why? Why is he not to seal it up? Because the time for its fulfillment was near. So the first thing that you have to recognize is that whatever John was writing about was certainly not going to take more than 600 years. Amen. Does that principle make sense? So, Daniel, these things are not going to happen for a long time. Seal it up, shut it up. 600 years later, Jesus says, now it's time to talk about it. John, a disciple of Jesus who seals and unseals things, Jesus Christ, remember, is the one who has the key of David. He who opens and no man can shut. He who shuts and no man can open. This is Jesus Christ. And now he has appeared to his own disciple, John, and he has told him, let me tell you what is about to happen shortly, soon, quickly. And at the end of the prophecy, he tells him, don't seal it up, John. This is going to happen soon. The time is near. So the first point that you must understand is that the whole prophecy of Revelation, chapter 1 to chapter 22, was not going to last as long as the prophecy of Daniel. It was left open because the primary audience was going to experience the fulfillments of the prophecy. That's why he's told, tell them it's not sealed. The time is near. It's upon you. If you look at the letters to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, to Smyrna, to Laodicea, and the rest of them in chapter 2 and chapter 3, he keeps telling them. For instance, in Philadelphia, he tells them, I'm going to keep you from the tribulation that is about to come upon the world. The other one is told they're going to suffer 10 days in prison. This was going to happen in their time in the first century. So, therefore, it is inconceivable and totally uncharacteristic to have a prophecy sealed in Daniel that lasts for 600 years, and then to have another prophecy you are told, don't seal because the time is near, and then to expect that it is being fulfilled 2,000 years later. God is not an author of confusion. God is a God of order. He is a God of a pattern. So the first thing I want you to realize and to notice is that the book of Revelation is not being fulfilled today. It was fulfilled very shortly after it was written. How do we know that? Because Jesus told John, don't seal it up, the time is near. Daniel was told, seal it up, the time is not near. This is going to take a long time. As a matter of fact, just so that you know, because somebody might say, where did you get that words? Those words are saying it's not near. Look again at Daniel. There's a part of it that I didn't read to you. I want to come back now to Revelation 10, so that now we can look at what does it mean that the 7 thunders that are within an unsealed prophecy, that they were sealed. So let's go back to Daniel 12 just for a second here. So Daniel 12. So in verse 4, he's told, shut up the words, seal the book until the time of the end, right? Then when you come over here, verse 9, go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end, the last days. Many shall purify themselves and so on and so forth, make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. Of course, this is talking about the ministry of Jesus. Jesus told his disciples, unto you is given the keys of knowledge, the keys of the kingdom, the keys of understanding. But the Pharisees, the wicked ones, could not understand. This is why the first century, being the last days, the powers that be could not understand the ministry of Jesus, could not understand the fulfillment of the mystery of God. Now, it says, and from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days, 3.5 years. Blessed is he who waits until 1335 days, the day of tabernacles. But go your way until the end, and you shall rest, and you shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days, the end of the days of the old covenant. So do you notice that Daniel is being told, shut up these things because they're not going to take place soon. You are going to rest. You are going to die. You are going to remain dead for a long time, Daniel. But at the end of the days, you shall be resurrected. Dear friends, you need to understand that Daniel and all the other Old Testament saints and the New Testament saints of the first century were all resurrected at the coming of the Lord that came when the abomination of desolation, which brought the offerings to an end. Did you notice there? He says, from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, today there is no such thing as a regular burnt offering. Has not been there for 1900 years. When Jesus was on the earth, there was a regular burnt offering, a regular daily morning offering, evening offering. It was there. When did it end? When the temple was obliterated at the end of the days of the Old Covenant in 70 AD. That's when the final burnt offerings were made. They are gone forever. The end of days was in the first century. Now, let's go back to now our key passage. I know that's a lot of background information, but it is so that when I begin to speak about these, it's not going to be coming out of thin air. So in Revelation chapter 10, remember that the whole of the prophecy of Revelation is unsealed. Everything within Revelation is unsealed. The whole Revelation as a whole. In other words, it was going to happen in a short time. Definitely not 600 years. Because we know 600 years is long enough for a prophecy to be sealed. But for a prophecy to remain unsealed, you are talking about a very short time. Now, look at what happens. So this angel appears. I'm not going to read it again. And he has a little scroll in his hand. He sets his right foot in the sea, which is the Gentile nations. He sets his left foot in the land, which is Israel. And he calls out. And by the way, that's why you see in Revelation 13, a beast from the sea, a beast from the land. There's always sea and land. Revelation 21, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, but there was no more sea. The Gentile label is removed. There is no more Jew or Gentile once the New Testament comes into its full consummation. So anyway, he calls out with a loud voice, like a lion roaring. And when he called out, the seven thunders sound. Remember that the seven thunders are part of the prophecy of Revelation. But when they sound, John says, when the seven thunders sounded, I was about to write. But I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the seven thunders have said. Do not write it. So within this unsealed prophecy, we have a part of it that is sealed. This is what I believe it means. It means that everything that John was writing was going to be seen and experienced in a reasonably enough short time that the readers of John, the first century church of Ephesus, the first century believers in Jerusalem, and wherever there were believers, were going to experience all the things that are happening here. We have shown before how in Revelation 18, it can be proven that Mystery Babylon was apostate Jerusalem Levitical priesthood that was destroyed in 70 AD. So everything was going to happen within that time. However, there was something that involved a final blow of judgment that was going to remain unfulfilled for a significant amount of time. Not significant enough to be over 600 years, but significant enough that the primary audience of John was not actually going to see it. You see, because the whole prophecy, this is going to happen shortly. This is not a prophecy for the far, far future. However, a part of it, the seven thunders, which is a representation of judgment. Thunders always in the Old Testament is judgment. That judgment, the seven thunders, the thunder that is associated with God himself, would be a little bit later within the sequence of things. Now, look at how it happens in Revelation 19 so that you can see where I'm leading with this. In Revelation 19, and I'm hoping that many of you or some of you have already been following many times when I teach about Revelation or other preterists, and we can show that at the end of Revelation 19, this is when Jerusalem is destroyed in 70 AD. Look at this. So at the end of Revelation 19, I want you to follow the sequence. So then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True and Righteous. He judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. And he has a name written that no one knows but himself. He's clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he's called is the Word of God. The armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. From his mouth came a sharp sword, with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them. So notice, at the time he's coming to judge and to make war, and then you are being told that after that, he will rule them. So there is a ruling that will continue after the second coming of the nations. He will rule the nations. So the nations will not disappear. The nations will not be destroyed. He will rule them. How? With a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of Almighty God. That's the part of wrath. That's the part of destruction. But after subduing them, he's going to rule them. On his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun with a loud voice, and with a loud voice he called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, come, gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both great and small. Now, this is a reference to Jeremiah 7. So if you are one of those people that like to follow those threads, you can look up Jeremiah 7, you can look up Jeremiah 19 and Isaiah 66 that describe how the rebels would literally be killed and thrown into Gehenna, a place outside of Jerusalem, and their bodies would be eaten by vultures and jackals. They would not be buried. So this is a representation of a literal thing that was to take place, and that did take place in 70 AD. Now, and I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth with their armies. Now notice, it is the kings of the earth, not the kings of the sea. The earth is Israel. The sea are the Gentile nations. So the beast is of the earth, is of Israel. This is the zealots. So the beast is the zealots. They come with their armies. They are gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the horse and against his army. And the beast was captured. And with it, the false prophet who is in its presence. This is the second beast that has two horns in Revelation 13. So both beasts are captured at 70 AD. They are thrown into the lake of fire. Look at what it says. The false prophet who is in his presence, who had done the signs by which he had deceived those who had received the mark of the beast. Mark of the beast is found in Revelation 13. And those who had worshipped its image. These two, the two beasts, which are the zealots and the Levitical apostate priesthood that had rejected Jesus, the Sanhedrin of Israel, the temple authorities, these two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. Now, at this point, if you start asking, what is this lake of fire? It is the second death. It is the second wave of judgment, the final wave of judgment that would separate these people forever from God. Total destruction. The first death had taken place back in the Babylonian captivity. So this is the second death. We are told this in Revelation 20. And the rest were slain by the sword that came from the mouth of him who was sitting on the horse, and all the birds were gorged with their flesh. So this is describing the activity of actual warfare that took place between the armies of God, that is the Roman Empire, those were the armies of God, and the rebel armies, that is the Jews. This should not be a strange concept. In the Old Testament, when Israel rebelled against God, God brought his army, that is the Babylonians, to destroy Jerusalem. So in 587 BC, the armies of God were the Babylonians. The Israelites were the enemies of God. In 70 AD, the armies of God were the Roman soldiers. The enemies of God were the apostate Jews who had not only rejected and crucified Christ, but they had also killed his apostles. That's why at the beginning of Revelation 1:7, you are told he is coming soon on the clouds. And even those that pierced him will see him. They would still be alive. It's only a 40-year period. Now, so what happens? So these two beasts are thrown alive into the lake of fire. Now, if you know the Bible well, you know that the Bible did not have chapters up until maybe 500 years ago. So in the first century, when John wrote this letter, there was no Revelation 19 and then Revelation 20. It was just a scroll with words on it. There were no verses, there were no chapters. So therefore, if you read Revelation 19, any passage of the Bible anyway, without including verses and chapters, what you will find is that there is a continuation of the activity of holding accountable the forces that had been fighting against the kingdom of Messiah. What we see in Revelation 19 is that at the second coming, the two beasts that were responsible for the rebellion are destroyed. The men that had submitted to these two beasts are also destroyed. And we know that this happened historically in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Then we continue. So this is not a departure. This is a continuation. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit, and a great chain. And he seized the dragon. Remember, there was a trifecta: the dragon, and the two beasts. The dragon, the beast with 10 horns, and the false prophet. This was the trinity of evil. So the two beasts are thrown in the lake of fire. But the dragon is not immediately held accountable. Look at what happens. He seizes the dragon. And if you are following in the sequence, you should expect that the dragon will be thrown in the lake of fire. However, look at what he says. He does. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and he binds him for 1,000 years. And he threw him into the pit. And he shut it and sealed it over him so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. So what has the dragon been doing so far? He has been deceiving the nations up to this point. He has been causing them to rebel against the plan of God. He has been deceiving the Jews. Jesus told them, your father is the devil. He's a liar. He never speaks the truth. The devil, Satan, the dragon, was already actively deceiving people during Jesus' ministry. The devil, Satan, was actually deceiving the nations during Paul's ministry. He says that. He says that the Satan, the angel, disguises himself as an angel of light. And therefore his ministers do the same thing. Right? So we know that during the ministry of Jesus, Satan was active in deception. We know that during the ministry of the apostles, Satan was active doing deception. And in fact, we are told here at the end of this war that has been going on, that ends in 70 AD, that he has been deceiving the nations. But now he is bound for 1,000 years. After that, he must be released for a little while. Now, I want to contend here that the reason why John was told to seal the 7 thunders was because whereas the beasts that were alive, that were present during the lifetime of Ephesus and Smyrna and Laodicea and Pergamum and the Thyatira and Sardis, whereas they were going to experience all these things that were being prophesied in Revelation from chapter 1 to chapter 22, there was a part of it that was going to happen a little bit later, a little while later, that they were not going to be alive to see themselves. Because the 1,000 years take place after the second coming. The second coming has already taken place in Revelation 19. Now here is 1,000 years. As a matter of fact, we see that now at the time that Satan is bound for 1,000 years, thrones are set up, and those to whom authority to judge was committed sit on them. Matthew 19, Jesus told his disciples that they would sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel at the regeneration, at the coming of the Son of Man, when he would be sitting on his glorious throne himself. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul says, do you not know that we will judge the angels? We will judge the world in the future. So therefore, at the time that Paul is preaching to the Corinthians, Paul is not sitting on a throne. The Corinthians are not sitting on a throne. Peter is not sitting on a throne. The thrones were going to be issued at the second coming of Christ. So, therefore, I believe that the 7 thunders represent the final judgment of God that was going to take place upon the old covenant people. Because remember, judgment, as it pertains to the Bible, was an old covenant commandment. It was not a new covenant commandment. Because in the new covenant, God was not going to judge his people. God was not going to condemn his people. In contrary wise, he was going to be merciful to their iniquities. He was going to take their sins and cast them into the sea of forgetfulness. These are the terms of the new covenant. That's why the new covenant is good news. But before the new covenant could be brought into full consummation, the old covenant had to be fully taken out of the way. So at 70 AD, the old covenant is technically taken out of the way. The temple is destroyed. The priesthood is scattered. But the people are still alive, the Israelites. As a matter of fact, we know that about 60 years later, in 132 AD, the people of Israel not only regathered to fight against the very same Romans who had routed them out of Jerusalem, but they chose a new Messiah. They knew about Jesus, but they chose a new Messiah. His name was Simon Bar Kokhba. And this new Messiah of theirs led them into a great rebellion that was even more ferocious and more united than the one that took place in 66 AD, that brought the final destruction of the old covenant people of Israel and their final expulsion from the promised land. And that expulsion lasted all the way until the modern days, until 1948. So we know that there were 2 wars that took place in the 1st and 2nd century that culminated in the utter obliteration of the people of Israel until the modern times. Now, what do we see here in the Revelation 19 and 20? Look at this. Let me just go back here. I'm just going to highlight it. I'm not going to read the whole passage again, but I want you to see that at the coming of the Lord, what happened? Verse 19, at the coming of the Lord, and I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war. So there is a war. How does this war end? All these people are struck down. They are dead, right? The beasts are thrown into the lake of fire. But when you go into chapter number 20, what happens? The 2 beasts are thrown into the lake of fire. The dragon, which is their leader, is imprisoned. The saints are given authority to judge. They sit on thrones. Then what happens? Look at this. They came to life, the saints. They reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The 1,000 years is symbolic, by the way. It's not a chronological amount of time. The rest of the dead, those that had just died in the war, did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. There is a gap between the resurrection of the saints and the resurrection of the wicked. There is a 1,000-year metaphoric or symbolic gap. This is the first resurrection. That's of the saints. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such, the second death has no power. But they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for what? For battle, another war. Remember that Revelation is being written in order to detail how the old covenant is brought to a final end. So these wars are wars of the old covenant. They are not wars of the new covenant. Because God will never fight against his own people in the new covenant. But under the old covenant system, which of course people become part of the covenant in the flesh, when these people became apostate, they could fight against God and God could fight against them. But in the new covenant, because these people are in Christ and Christ is in his people, that's why we don't see such an arrangement or such an outcome in the new covenant. So that's why this is not part of today's activities. So Satan is released after 1,000 years and he gathers armies for a second war. Their numbers are like the sand of the sea. They marched up the broad plain of the earth. They surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, Jerusalem. But fire came down from heaven, consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. So what does this immediately tell you? That the beast and the false prophet have been at this point in the lake of fire for 1,000 years before Satan is thrown in there. They already were there. They were not thrown there together. They were not thrown in there together. There's a gap. Hopefully everybody can see it. So, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne and him who was seated on it, and from his presence earth and sky fled, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne. Now, do you notice here that this resurrection is the resurrection only of the wicked? Because the righteous had already been resurrected before the 1,000 years. The righteous had been ruling with Christ throughout the 1,000 years. Then now the wicked of the old covenant, and I keep emphasizing that because it's important to understand that this is a description of the activities that were taking place at the end, in the last days of the old covenant, not in the last days of time. The old covenant and its end came long time ago. Now we are in the perpetual, endless, infinite new covenant that has no last day, that has no final day of judgment. That doesn't mean that there is no judgment going on, but there is no one day set aside for judgment under the old covenant. Judgment is just a continuous thing. Just in the same way, reward is just a continuous thing. The saints who now die in the body immediately get glorified in heaven. They don't go to wait for another day, because Christ now brought in a new system in which his people are never, ever condemned. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged. Thunders, judgment. So why is it that the seven thunders are sealed, whereas the seven seals and the seven trumpets and the seven bowls are not sealed? Because the seven seals and the seven trumpets and the seven bowls were what was going to be experienced up to 70 AD. The seven thunders were going to be experienced in the second war. Well, when does history tell us the second war took place? So this is how things took place. The first war started in 66 AD. By 70 AD, Jerusalem was in ruins, totally destroyed, the temple gone. By 73 AD, the zealots were completely obliterated. They all committed suicide at Masada. Some of you have heard of the siege of Masada. Now, the Jews were carried away as slaves. They were scattered throughout the Roman Empire. However, they continue to exist and they continue to hope that they could continue to re-establish their old covenant way of worship. So, in about 117 AD, we hear that the Christians went back to Jerusalem. They found it in ruins. They rebuilt a church there. About 130 AD, the emperor of Rome visits Jerusalem. And it is recorded that while he was there, he saw the little church that was there of the Christians. That is recorded in history. But then he also saw the ruins of the old temple of the Jews that had been burned to the ground. No stone had remained on top of another, just as Jesus had said. So Hadrian, on seeing the church of the Christians and on seeing the ruins of Jerusalem, he is the emperor of the whole empire. He decides he is going to rebuild Jerusalem. He decides he is going to build a temple in Jerusalem. And this is announced out of his visit. When the Jews that were all around heard that the emperor of Rome was willing to rebuild their city and their temple, they thought and they felt that God was redeeming them, was bringing them back and giving them a second chance. So they streamed back into Israel and they started rebuilding houses and they started preparing for the rebuilding of the temple. However, when Hadrian heard that the Jews had returned and they were expecting to come and help them to rebuild their temple, he made it clear what he meant. He said, I'm rebuilding the city, but it's no longer going to be called Jerusalem. It's going to be called Aelia Capitolina. And I'm not going to rebuild your temple. I am going to build a temple to Jupiter, my God, an idol. Because of this, once the Jews realized that Hadrian was not trying to recover them, he was trying to establish a Roman city, they went into rebellion mode a second time. And the rabbis chose a man whose name was Simon. They later on called him Simon Bar Kokhba, although that was not his original name. But anyway, Simon Bar Kokhba became the anointed Messiah of the Jews of 132 AD. And in fact, according to Jewish history, all the Jews rallied around Simon Bar Kokhba in a rebellion that was greater than the one that was in 66 AD. And they fought against the Romans, the same Romans, in the same city. But this time, when the Romans defeated them, they so completely obliterated them that they expelled them from Israel, and they say that the Jews were never allowed to go back into Israel. And that was the end of Old Covenant Israel. I believe that that's when the seven thunders were fulfilled. When finally the Jews were totally and completely removed for thousands of years. The time that the Jews returned in 1948, the Romans were no longer there. There was no more ban on Jews coming to Israel, because that system was completely over and has been over for 1900 years. So, just wanted to lay that aside, that before you, to see that in Revelation 10, John is told things that are called the seven thunders. But he's told, seal those ones up. But everything else, he's told, don't seal it. Everything is going to happen shortly. But since the whole prophecy is about the transition from the old covenant into the new covenant, we can surmise that the seven thunders were not going to happen outside or thousands of years later, because thousands of years later, now we are fully in the new covenant. A covenant which promises that God will never judge his Jerusalem. God will never judge his priesthood. God will never judge his people again, ever. This is the goodness of the good news. Amen. Now, because I do want to go and enjoying myself watching Argentina and Brazil. I want you to think about those things. The next time that I come on, which is hopefully tonight, I will now have an open session where you can ask questions. This time, I did not answer any questions. I did not focus on anybody's comments. I just wanted to lay that case that the 1,000 years were between 70 AD and 132 AD. The 1,000 years was symbolic. Amen. So until next time, God bless you very much. Meditate on these things. If it didn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. Pray about it. If it made sense to you, let's discuss it later. Farewell.